There it is. All right. Good evening, everybody out there in Facebook land. Clyde here with Robert, and we got the PPD Zoom Room Tuesday night going on. And tonight is kind of a special night. It's the first webinar of the year, and it's also the time to do the Guess the Sequence contest drawing. And we have two names that we're going to pick for this year's winners, or this for this month's winners for guessing the sequence, the correct name. And I'm grabbing my notebook right now so that I can write these names down. If you would, if you're in Facebook land, go ahead and you're welcome to join us in the Zoom room. Just click on Pixel Pro Displays and then go to the PPD website and if you click on the link at the top of the page that says learning, it'll take you to our learning website. Our PPD Zoom room is underneath the link there, and you can join us in the Zoom room. So, but if you're just watching on Facebook, by all means, you can watch. I'll try to monitor the questions that people pop up. If you're in Zoom, go ahead and throw questions in chat. Tonight's topic is going to be on rendering options in xLights, not render styles, not sequencing. It's about using xLights and rendering from. But before we get started, let's go ahead and pull two names from the PPD sequence guessing contest. So this month is our guess the sequence contest is oh shoot, I gotta fix this. Hold on a second. There we go. This month the guess the sequence contest, the song for the month is everybody's favorite. As I could tell from the guessing, was Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You." I kind of threw a left curve ball at everybody, and but at the same time, you can't deny that if you saw the number of downloads, it really was a good song to put out there. Even though a number of you would like to see Mariah kind of go off into the sunset, she's just going to stick around for about a month. But she's here for us for this year. You'll have all year to lock her in your folders, and then you can bring her out and thaw her out next December when that time of year rolls around again. So, with that being said, let's go ahead. We're going to pick two winners today. Two winners. Each winner is going to get a $50 gift card to Boscoyo Studios, everybody's favorite Boscoyo. They have all of the Coro that you ever desired and more, all of the props. And PPD has all the certified models for everything that you're going to select for it. So, with that being said, let's go ahead. We're going to pick the first winner. And the first winner is going to be Mr. Stephen Maddox. So, got my pen and paper. Mr. Stephen Maddox, welcome. Congratulations. If you are in Facebook, can you tag him on the video so that everybody knows that he is the winner for one gift card from Boscoyo? All right. Congratulations, Stephen. And the second winner is going to be from the same list here. Well, I don't think we're going to let Melissa win this time, too, because Stephen just won. That would be kind of unfair. Well, maybe we will. I'm not going to change the rules.
I say we just let her win, and then
I just
maybe
I
the lighters will get their significant others involved as well, and
yeah,
we'll
that's
a bunch of more people
yeah,
involved.
I agree. I
So
agree.
congratulations, the Maddox family.
The Maddox family has won. They've swept the contest for the Guess the Sequence contest. So let that be a lesson to all you. We've never had this happen before. You saw it live here in PPU. So, well, in PPU, PPD, and in the PPD Zoom room. So with that, I am going to get my screen kind of set up for what we're about to start doing, which is a small webinar on some of the review. It's not going to be like 100% everything you needed to know about rendering, but what we'll talk about is some instances and things that are in xLights that will help you whenever it comes to rendering sequences and doing sequencing, especially if you have, let's say, a computer that doesn't have a lot of let's say horsepower, or just in general it's an older computer, or it doesn't have a lot of resources. Say it has low amount of RAM, an older hard drive, or maybe it doesn't have an SSD. Maybe it has just different factors that might contribute to having a PC that where you're using a Windows PC. Because quite frankly, there's people that are in the Zoom room tonight, like Barry, who and if Miss if Papa John was here, he would say that he likes using his Mac. But for the rest of us, we kind of really like our Windows PC, and we appreciate what Windows does and the ease at which we get to work with Windows. So for us, changing it might really not be realistic for some of us. So for the folks who have issues with rendering where you see stuttering or it's hard to move things around, I'm going to kind of drop some hints and things that I've done. This is kind of a topic that kind of come out of nowhere, and it's probably because it actually is because of Barry Wiles. He's one of our PPD affiliates from Sequence Solution. He mentioned in the xLights group earlier today that he wanted to he was considering getting a Mac in order to do some rendering, because Macs seem to render a little bit better than your regular everyday PC. So that's where kind of we're starting out with in tonight's webinar, and why I kind of want to hit this topic, right? So with that being said, the first thing we're going to look at, and I need to get my little notes out here. Where'd it go? There to go. There it is. This over here so I'm not lost. And do I have my chat screen? There it is. Okay. Share screen so everybody can see. So the first thing I want to talk about, and well, I'm going to have some of these here on the screen to kind of walk through some of the things. One of the things that I want to talk about before we kind of jump in to just talking about xLights, the first thing I want to say is probably one of the most important things that most people don't think about is the drive that you have attached to your computer. If you have an older computer, you're familiar with a mechanical drive, but also you might be familiar with an SSD or an M.2. An SSD is not a mechanical drive. It's a flash drive of sorts that can store large amounts of information. And not only that, its access speed is much quicker to get to the main processor of your computer, and so it allows information to flow faster. And if you're using, and I'm holding up in the camera right now, if you're just listening, I'm holding up a thumb drive. And there's people that I know, God bless you guys, that will put your sequences on a thumb drive, and you'll plug it, you'll take your laptop and you'll plug it right into your laptop. And you'll sequence on your computer with this thumb drive in your laptop, and you'll carry it with you wherever you go. Now, is that a bad thing? No. But here's the thing. Whenever you stick this USB stick into your laptop, or into your computer for that matter, you're creating a data transfer path for this computer to communicate with. And that communication path is actually pretty long. And it's in some cases way slower than if you were to just do it on the internal hard drive of the laptop or of the computer or of the SSD that's attached to it. So SSD or M.2 is going to trump a hard drive, and a hard drive is going to trump this little SSD, or I'm sorry, this little thumb drive that you're going to try to take your sequences and sequence on. The same with this is the same rule applies to something like a NAS drive, which I'm not familiar with using, or if you have like a server where you keep all your files on. If the files aren't local to your computer, they're going to take longer to render. If you natively keep your files, let's say stored in a cloud drive somewhere, and they're not natively located on your drive, it's going to take longer for you to render your sequences. That's just the way it's going to be, because xLights has to go through that file path to find all of the attached information. So my recommendation is never ever sequence on a thumb drive. Don't use like a server to save all of your stuff on, because it just takes longer to render your sequence. As soon as you put it native on your hard drive, xLights can find it way faster, and I highly recommend it. If you have a hard drive, that's fine. It's going to work faster on an SSD drive or an M.2 drive. So that's probably the best precursor to doing anything with the rendering as far as your computer goes. So with that being said, there's a couple things in Windows preferences. Let me. Hey, it looks like we've got. Give me just a second here. Where did? There we go. There we go. Okay. We had somebody unmuted there. I just want to make sure it was taken care of. Okay, so to get rolling with something in xLights, one of the things that you should be aware of, where are you at? That's not the one I want. There's one thing that you should be aware of about xLights is there's a number of preferences. If you go into File and into Preferences, I really don't want to use this one because I don't want to mess with it. But if we open up xLights Preferences window, oh no. Tell me that. Yeah, I think it did. Oh, that kind of sucks. Which one was that? That was the 60 frames per second. Oh, I'm going to have to open another one. I knew that was going to happen. Give me just a second here. Bring this one over here while this comes back online. Okay, so oh, there we go. It already came up. What was that one? That was our regular file. Okay, so let's go into preference. I really don't want to use this one. Okay, so if we go into file and we open up, let me start this again. Okay, so if we go in and hit File and Preferences, and we go into the xLights Preferences in Windows, we're going to find a couple things that are going to be useful for us. I'm going to start with hardware video decoding. One of the things that you should be quite aware of is some of the preferences that are in xLights and how they can affect the rendering of your sequence. If I'll give a shout out to Josh Little, he had a couple of our sequences. One of them particularly would never render, and he had hardware video decoding. It was checked. And for whatever reason, one song out of his entire collection of, 2-3 years of PPD club songs that he's acquired or picked up or selected, one of them would not render, and all he had to do was go in here, and this is the first thing he had to do, was he had to uncheck the hardware video decoding, and as soon as he did that, it was able to render. In some instances, it would just hang on it, but in any event, sometimes, depending on if you have hardware video decoding checked or not checked, sometimes a sequence will appear to like it will be continuously rendering, like it's stuck in the render period, and at some point it sticks there and it won't complete the render, or it will crash. So if you have that situation, this is the quickest way to check to see if it's a quick fix, to see if that works for you. But that's number one. Number two, hardware video decoding uses the power of your graphics card, from what I understand. Again, I'm not a developer, I'm just a user. And what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to speed up your graphics card processing. Now, it speed up your rendering with using it in concert with the power of your graphics card. Now, some of the older graphics cards, not on my current PC, but my second PC, the original one that I built back about 6 or 7 years ago, it does not like hardware video decoding at all. It will not render my sequences. It's an older graphics card. This computer has a little bit more modern, probably a 2019 graphics card. It's older. It's, well, 4 years old or so now. But in any event, it still does a decent job rendering. But I can turn on the hardware video decoding, and sometimes it will render way faster by, like, maybe, let's say, 10 or 15%. So you're shaving off seconds. And so it really wasn't, to me, it really wasn't that big of a deal. So I got used to just leaving it off, because on the other computer, if I had it turned on, I would have crashes, or I would have freezes, or something to that effect. So whenever you go over to the Mac side, I understand that it might work a little bit better. But just if you want to try it, try it. But if you start having issues rendering sequences where they hang up, you want to uncheck this and see if if your renders don't hang up. You can go back and uncheck this, and that kind of might fix the problem for you if you begin to have it. So that's one of the preferences, one of the main preferences that I want you to be aware of first. The next preference that I'm going to go to is, I'm just going to go over to the sequences tab here. And the first thing we'll talk about here is render on save. Now, you'll notice that I do not have this render on save checked. And the reason for that is I constantly sequence, and I sequence all year long. If I'm going to sequence, I'm only going to sequence, and I'm going to constantly save, because I'm constantly sequencing. So it doesn't make much sense for me to render every time I save something that I've just worked on. For example, if I'm working on an effect for a megatree sequence or matrix sequence, and I spend 20 minutes on this, I'm going to save it like 3 or 4 times in the process of, oh, I like that, or I don't like that. Oh, I like that, and that looks really good. And after I get so far, I'm going to hit the save button, because I naturally do that. But if you're working inside a sequence that's almost done, every time you hit the save button, what's going to happen is you'll end up re-rendering the sequence. And if your computer doesn't have a lot of, let's say, RAM, or and it's an older graphics card, or it's rather a CPU, you're going to have issues whenever it comes to the render times on those, only because you're hitting render on save every time you hit the save button. So this is something to consider. I'm not telling you that you have to turn it off, but if you're working off of the season, not on the season, so in other words, it's not October, November, and you're doing this in February, March, April, just turn this off. You can always come back and turn it on. So that's the first thing I would recommend. The second thing that you see here is something called low definition render. Now, I honestly had never tried the low definition render, and I actually did give it a shot earlier. Now, what I'm going to do is I actually brought the wrong set over first. This is the low definition render times. Now, I did render Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas Is You. We're not going to play her, don't worry. Well, that kind of stunk. It should be this one, and it should be this one. There we go, and this one. So these are the 3 versions of Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas Is You. Now, I'm kind of foreshadowing on another thing that we're going to talk about, which is frames per second. But I wanted you to see that if you had 3 different versions of the same sequence, all at different frames per second, you could see that there is a render time difference between frames. And just so that you can see this, the main base render time for this would be 15 seconds at 20 frames per second. You can see I put it in the title right here. This is a 40 frame per second sequence here. And this is the 60 frame per second sequence here. At 40 frames, it took 49 seconds to render. And this is at the low definition as opposed to the standard definition that xLights has. Now here, this is the 60 frame per second render time. It's 46 seconds. Now, I wish I had the time to do all the little graphs that I had done. But if I pop over and I open this up, this is without the low definition render selected. And you can see one's at 15.5 seconds and the other one's at 16.3, the difference of like 1.5 seconds. So this is the regular definition of xLights render versus the low definition. And I can't really tell the difference. I mean, now it probably plays a lower definition. It doesn't look as pretty whenever you hit the render button, but it gets all this stuff in there and doing something interesting while you're sequencing. The second option would have been this. We'll go and I'll minimize this and minimize this. The second option, and we'll actually have to go in and we're going to have to render the third one because it was the 40 frames. So this one here was at 29.4 seconds, but if we look at the low definition, 29.45. So there was absolutely like no difference in this. Now, unfortunately, you gotta love whenever xLights crashes on you and you're doing a render. I'll go ahead and open this up. It's probably gonna mess up the screen a little bit, but we'll hit the render button on the 60 frame per second, and you can see the difference. We'll go in and set it as soon as it loads up here. And this was the standard. I believe this was standard. So let me get rid of this. Preferences, we'll make sure that the preferences are set accordingly. Sequence. This is the regular definition, not the low definition. So we'll click OK. Now I'll go ahead and close these because you saw those. No difference with those. That's the 40 frames. And now we have the 60 frames here. So here's the 60 frame low definition. This is the 60 frame standard. So it was 46 seconds to render that. Now you just saw this one open up on your right side of the screen. We'll go ahead and click the render button and see how well that works. Probably going to get a little choppy here whenever we go through the live stream, but looks like screen capture will get it. But again, this is the 60 frames per second. This is 60 frames per second. Some seconds whenever you're going live is a long time. So I'm getting a graphic ready here to kind of illustrate the difference between some different things here. So okay, so it says at 57 seconds, this was at 60 frames per second. This one's at 60 frames with the low definition render. You can see that it did shave off, the higher the definition, it did shave off some of the render time. Now, again, we're not sitting here and we're not playing these, so they may appear differently at a low definition. The low definition might not look as pretty, but the regular definition is going to look just as good, but as you're expecting. But there's a difference of 10 seconds that you just saved by changing one of the preferences in xLights. So that's something to be noted. So the next thing I want to talk about is we just showed you different frames per second whenever it came to 20 frames per second, 40 frames per second. And I'm using 60 frames as an example. As you see here, I'm going to close this out real quick. I do not need that. No. And I want to show you whenever you go into sequence settings, which is this icon at the top center of your screen, I want you to see right here where it says 16 millisecond timing. And what I had done was I took my sequences. My sequences generally are done in 20 frames per second. You can convert them up or you can convert them down, whatever makes you happy. You can certainly do that. But I wanted to show that if you changed your millisecond timing, so 50 millisecond timing would be 20 frames per second. Right now, 16 millisecond timing, you can't do anything between 16 and 17. If you wanted to change the millisecond timing of your sequence, this is where you would do it. You go into the sequence settings and you click the checkbox or the question mark here, not the checkbox, and you click OK there and see how you can enter a frame interval right here. You can hit the up down button. So if it's 17, it's going to be 58.2 frames. But if you hit 16, it's going to be 62. So there's no way to get to 60. I just put that number in there so that we get at least to the 60 number. And because you can't do like 16.5, it won't let you do a decimal. It has to be a whole number. So this is how you can go in and you can change the frames per second. What exactly is frames per second? So I have this little graphic I'm going to draw for you, and I want you to, at the moment, I want you to imagine that this section here, I'll draw a little box around it, right? So this section here, this is a 1 second period of time, okay? And each one of these little slots, now I didn't count them out, but just as a quick graphic, you can imagine that if this is 1 second, one of these little blocks could represent like a millisecond. And there's 1,000 milliseconds to 1 second, I believe. I think that's how it is. And so obviously it'd have to have a little 1,000 little squares. So if you break it up to frames per second, you can do 60 frames per second and you have a lot of little tiny blocks, and your blocks are much closer together like this. Well, what this represents in xLights is your little sequencing blocks in between each one of your timing marks. So each one of these could be a timing mark, these little lines that you see here. And whenever you go from 60 frames per second, we'll say, to like 30 frames per second, now you have less blocks. Your little lines are a little further apart, but your blocks are a little bigger. That's exactly what xLights is doing whenever we look at the frames per second. So what you're doing at xLights, these little squares, this one little timing mark here, this is one frame, or that's one frame of the second of time that is available for xLights to divide the timing mark up by. So this gives you much more direct and specific control over where you place your timing marks. So xLights, because its timings there's more timings, you scrunched a lot more timing marks in xLights. What happens is it gives you the ability to add more into the sequence. Well, that also means that it's going to take you longer to render your sequences because xLights has to render more throughout the entire sequence. So when you go between 20 frames per second to 60 frames per second, we'll say, and xLights goes all the way up to 100, by the way. If you go at 100, if you set your frames per second to 100, you're adding that many more sequencing events or sequencing calculations. And this is the reason why your render times are so long. The payoff, though, is that you get what appears to be for many people a smoother looking effect. Everything glides across your layout a little bit nicer according to some people, but to me, I couldn't tell. So I always sequence at 20 frames per second because, well, there's a lot of reasons why I don't sequence at 40, but just know that the time it takes for your transmitter to transmit the audio out to the cars that are sitting there 20, 30 feet away, and the modern cars today with modern audio systems, that audio might be turned to digital signal, and there's actually possibly a delay whenever they hear the music versus see your sequencing. And there's hundreds of things that happen between that transmission. So I've never depended on 60 frames, 40 frames, 50 frames. I've always depended on 20, and it's never let me down. It always looks really good. So that's what I stick with. So that's kind of an explanation about the higher your frames per second, the more render time you're going to use, and that's why you see some of these higher numbers um, built into the into the rendering of xLights. So let's see, where's my little notes at? So inside the sequence, I'm going to go ahead and close this. Let's go and look at, shut this out. Okay, so a couple other things that if you're sequencing in xLights and you are using higher frames per second, or you're using a lot of videos or shaders and so forth in your sequences, some things that you can do while you are sequencing to help you if you find that whenever you're, this is a whole sequence. There's a lot of effects in mixed into everywhere. If I go like to the mega tree and I'm working on the mega tree, and I'm trying to adjust some of these effects backwards and forwards or whatever, you may find that whenever you're trying to make these adjustments live, xLights is actually making changes and trying to render every time you click on an effect. And what you also might realize is that xLights stutters a whole lot whenever it does this. So my recommendation is use this little checkbox down here if you start to notice stutter, and you can come down here and you can begin making changes to all of your effects. It doesn't re-render everything in the sequence, and it won't re-render this effect, but whenever you click unsuspend and then you hit, you can also do this. You can select a region, click and drag up in the timing mark, right click and render selected region. And what it will do is it will render that. Now, it may not render it in this instance, but this is one of the things that you can do if it starts stuttering on you and you want to see the changes immediately. That's just one of the things that can happen. Another thing that is helpful is if we come in and let's say you've sequenced the whole tree or the whole matrix and you already know what it looks like. And what if we hover over top of the column, the header, the row headers, and right click and we hit model and select effects? What that does is that selects all of the effects for this specific model. And what we can do is another thing, which is fantastic. We can lock effects. If you lock an effect, we can utilize a preference that is in the preferences screen. And I'll go ahead and open that up as well. And you can see that we have, let's see, render caching. So we have something called render caching, and there's a couple different options. Usually by default, locked effects only can be cached. And what cached means is xLights will save a kind of a preview or a list of the levels of all of those effects. And once xLights sees that those effects are locked, it says, hey, once those effects are locked, I know that you didn't change those. So I'll just hold that in my cache or I'll hold it in my memory. And if you don't change anything and it's locked, then I don't have to re-render that. So having render cache enabled and locking your effects can potentially help lower your render times. So xLights won't have to re-render everything all the time. There is another thing, another side to this that you need to be aware of, and that's render cache can be enabled. And now, what is enabling the render cache? Well, if you enable the render cache, and I'm going to pull up the File Explorer here and jump over to our render cache. Inside your show layout folder, that is your show folder, there is a render cache folder. Now, if you scroll down through here, if you rendered a sequence, xLights creates a cache of effects. And if I come in here and I look for, where is it at? Oh, it's right at the top. Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas Is You. xLights will cache the files right here in this folder if you enable your render cache. And this actually is probably the best way to render your sequences when you're working on them, because xLights will keep this render cache open for you, and it will plant all of those effects. It'll save all of those effects so that when you open the sequence, you hit render, it just reads the screen and says, oh, yeah, I have all of this in my cache. I can play it real quick for you. And it takes you maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 seconds as opposed to a minute or 2 minutes of having to sit through a render time if you have a really big layout. So this is something that is quite helpful. Now, here's the downside with render cache, because there is a downside. xLights creates all of these files for you. If you have now, I'm this is the extreme case because I go through a ton of sequences and touching stuff up and working with a bunch of things all through the year. If I had render cache enabled on whenever I'm sequencing, this folder would fill up with a bunch of files. So sometimes we have to purge these files. These files don't need to be here after you're done working on the sequence. If you're done working on the sequence, if you finished it, yep, I'm done with that. I need to move on to the next thing. You can go in and you can delete the render cache. It's not going to hurt anything. There's also an option here in xLights, I believe. Let's go to Tools, and we should be able to purge your render cache. And what that does, I believe, either at startup or at shutdown, xLights will go through all of your rendered cached files and it will delete them. It'll purge them so that it doesn't take up all of that extra space. Let me go back in here. I hope I didn't close that. Oh, I guess I did. Give me just a second. I'll open this up. Because if we go into the render cache, we can see that if we right click and we do a what do you call it, properties, this is going to take a minute. There's 3.2 gigabytes of files that are attached to that render cache, and if you have 10 sequences and they all have 3 gigs, that's 30 gigs of data on your drive. And if you're looking to conserve drive space, this is the downside. Yes, it saves it for you. Yes, it's easy to open and render it, and it does it way faster. But just be advised, if you're trying to watch how much that you're utilizing the render cache, it may, especially if you use, like we use Dropbox or we use Google Drive or something like that. If you have limited space on your Google Drive, you might not want to do this because it's kind of, maybe too close. Maybe you have to buy more storage or whatever from them. So just be advised. Now, generally, I never use render caching. You can look at some of these old sequences that I had that there's nothing in the folder, but I did do a render cache just so that you guys could see that it does work. It does work rather quickly, actually, and it does a great job, but it also fills up that folder. And if you forget about it at the end of the season, then next year you open up a new folder. Now that folder's sitting there and it's just taking up space on your hard drive. There's another setting if we were to go in and while we have locked effects here, these are still locked. I want to show you this as well. One of the things that you may have noticed about one of the recent updates in xLights was if you import a sequence, there is a locked effects on import checkbox. So if you import a sequence from a vendor or somebody else's sequence or a Google Drive sequence, you can automatically lock those effects, which helps with the render caching for locked effects. You can import effects and lock them upon import. Now, this doesn't stay, if you check it, it stays on locked effects and it locks your effects when you import. But if you uncheck it, it won't lock them. Now, there's no preference to whether it's always on or always off. It's on if you check it, it's off if you don't. At the moment, I have it unchecked because I don't care to lock my effects whenever I import on my home layout, that is. So I disabled it, and now it stays disabled. But whenever you install xLights, if your effects are getting locked upon import, this is how you unlock them upon import. If they've already been imported and locked, all you're going to do is you're just going to come into your sequencing screen. You can hit Control A. That selects all of the effects. See how they're all purple now? And you can right click and you can unlock them all. And then if you click off of them, you can see that now these aren't purple anymore as they were, say, for example, whenever this one was locked. See how you can't move it. Now you can move these other ones. So the other thing that I want to bring up about, and this is why I was doing the selection and showing you the different selections in the locked versus cached for the render cache. Um, let's say you finish the matrix and you don't need it to render anymore. You already know it looks good. It's to your liking. What you can do is you can go model, select effects, my matrix. Now, what I can do is I can right click and I can disable render and see how it turned everything bright yellow there. It has that nice yellow color. It didn't lock the effects. It didn't make it so you can't change them, but it's telling xLights, hey, I'm here, but ignore me. Basically, it's making it making xLights aware of, or you're making xLights aware that, yeah, there's effects, but I don't want you to worry about them. And so if you hit render, it's not going to render these effects. So why is this helpful? Well, if you're working on a sequence where you're done with a part, you don't need to keep seeing that part over and over again. It's nice to see it, but if you're just trying to get the work done and things are stuttering for you, this is a way that you can deactivate some effects, especially, for example, in my case, I mean, I do some crazy stuff. I like to do backflips in xLights. There's, what is that, 34 layers for this effect? I mean, that's as tight as I could get them to be together all at one point. Maybe I could copy and paste these up a little bit higher, yeah, but it made it easier because I had them spread out. But so I mean, 30 layers, that's a lot of layers. But the bottom line is that that if I'm working with all of these effects, if I have a big stack of effects that I'm working with, that's a whole bunch of render that has to be done. And then depending on what we're having it do, for example, different effects give you a little bit more of a headache whenever it comes to render times. Um, so what do I mean by that? Well, there are some effects in xLights that will absolutely cause you to have more render time. Somebody mentioned it earlier in that post that if you use the shader effect, maybe Windows isn't as tuned or xLights isn't as tuned to use um, to use some of the graphical renderings that it could be. And that's true, but it still can do it. So it just takes it longer. It's not as efficient, we'll say. So keep in mind that if you use shaders, if you use some of the higher mathematical effects, such as, let's say, the fan effect, um, plasma and butterfly are actually pretty high on that list, I think, with calculations. The video effect, it's not that it's hard for it to render, it's that Windows also, I believe Windows, again, I'm not a developer, so I don't know 100% of all of the inner workings, but I know that the video effect does take a little bit more power. I've been told numerous times that if you try to render the Greatest Showman, there's a lot of video effects used in it. It's not a good example of a render benchmark, but I used it because it was something everybody could use on across platforms. And what we found is video renders way faster on Mac. And so if you have the video effect on a Mac, it usually renders faster, but xLights is a little slower. So in that instance, the video effect, it's not that it's bad. It just might take longer if you have a video effect. And we happen to use a number of video effects in our sequences at PPD. So but still, I get render times generally around the under the 40-second or 30-second mark whenever I'm sequencing at 20 frames per second. So it never affects me. Um, it never affects me. And so that's generally, again, and I'm just using the basic xLights render. So um, what I, let me go back and look and see what else my screen shows. Nope. So as far as rendering goes, I think the biggest thing that we can pull together from the whole rendering challenge that some of you might be facing isn't so much that xLights doesn't have options in Windows. It's that xLights does have options. It's what you should be doing.
Webinar too, so hold on one second. I think I gotta end it. Clyde, am I ending it?
In a few moments, everybody.
Okay.
Um, so just kind of to wrap it up, there are plenty of tools here in in xLights that if you're working on sequencing and you're having some of the stuttering issues, or you have issues whenever you push the render button, it's taken like 2-3 minutes. Try some of these things out. Number one, don't be sequencing off of a thumb drive. Don't be sequencing off of your NAS drive or your server that's locked in your basement or in the closet. You sequence right on your main PC. That's going to speed you up quite a bit. Number two, number two, having those render caching options available is great. I personally don't use them. Once it's rendered, it's rendered. But if you lock your effects, that does help in some cases. If you want to speed it up a little bit, you want to go ahead and right click and select effects and lock the effects. That can help. The low definition render, I really didn't. I never messed with it until today, but it worked. It worked on the higher frames per second, but it didn't work on the lower frames per second. So the low definition render to me, does it work for me, or is it necessary for me? No, not really. Everything worked the same. But at the higher frames per second, it certainly did. If you sequence at higher frames per second, and one of the things you can do is you can temporarily change it, temporarily change your sequencing to a lower frames per second, just so you can render it quickly. But then that's kind of silly, because then you'd have to change it back to what you're sequencing at. So it doesn't make much sense to kind of do that. But then also, if you're making changes in the sequence and it's stuttering for you, and that's a big concern for a lot of people, like I try to move an effect and it stutters, the best thing that you can do is use that suspend render that is at the bottom of the screen and hit the checkbox, and then you can make your change, and then you can select the region that you changed up in the timing grid, and you can quickly and easily make it simple to re-render only that section. And xLights will render. It might take a couple seconds, but xLights will render that area, just that area. It won't render the whole sequence. So hopefully that's a couple hints. Hopefully you learned a couple things. If you're on Facebook right now and you have questions, I don't have Facebook open. Come on and jump in the room. The rest of you, I don't see anything in chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in chat. We're going to be here the rest of the evening, just hanging out in the PPD room. It's going to be an open mic session. If you have questions, if you're new to the hobby, welcome to you guys. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to say goodnight to you all. Rob's going to say goodnight to everybody on Facebook. So if you have any questions, jump in the room.
Good night, Facebook. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you soon, guys. Thank you very much.